This is a recording of diagnosis coding for HIV and AIDS, which is the latter part of Chapter 14 in the AHA Handbook. Page 156 is where it starts, the bottom of page 156, and I want to bring your attention to the comment that is made in that book. It says code B20 is assigned for all types of HIV infections which are described by a variety of terms. And so those terms that are bulleted there all equate to AIDS or HIV. Our clinicians will document this in a variety of ways, and here are some of those ways. You can look up the code or get to the code B20 in the index using the main term acquired immune deficiency syndrome, and that would lead you to code B20. I want to bring your attention to the top of page 156, where it says or talks about the unconfirmed diagnosis. And we know, we've learned already, that in an inpatient setting you can code probables and possibles as if they were confirmed. One of those exceptions, or one of the exceptions to that rule, is HIV and AIDS, and so you would never code B20 unless it was a confirmed diagnosis. What you would code instead are the signs and symptoms. Now the next section for HIV and AIDS is the testing of that, and I've also given you an E360 in your learning plan, helpful information regarding coding the serology testing for HIV infection. So in E360 in this area in the learning plan is sort of a summary of what you have on page 157. So if a patient is coming in for a screening and is showing signs and symptoms, your code is Z11.4, which your handbook indicates right away in the first paragraph under serologic testing of HIV. When the patient returns to a visit to learn the results of that, the Z71.7, the counseling would be assigned as the reason. When the test result is positive but the patient displays no signs and symptoms, Z21 category asymptomatic HIV is coded. And when a patient has had contact with, been exposed to HIV virus but shows no signs and symptoms, the Z20.6. And this is all indicated in the area of serological testing on page 157, as well as the learning plan in E360, which indicates helpful information regarding serologic testing. I would suggest that you write down, make your own notes as to what is coded. Now, it says the results are positive and the patient has signs and symptoms. The first code is going to be the B20, indicating the patient has an HIV infection, and then you would have your Z code for the counseling when they're coming in for that visit. The next section is sequencing of HIV-related diagnoses. So this is beyond and after the testing and follow-up appointment to learn about the results. This might be weeks down the road or months down the road. The sequencing of HIV-related diagnosis is that the B20, the HIV or the AIDS code B20, is always sequenced as the principal, with additional codes for the HIV-related conditions coming next. The only time that this might not happen is if a patient with AIDS is coming in for an unrelated condition. Let's say they fell and broke their arm. That would go first, the fracture code, because that fracture is really not related to AIDS. It's because they had an accident or an injury. And after the fraction code then would come the B20 and any other associated conditions. So let's look at exercise 14.2, and you have the answers posted in E360. I would get those answers out as you're listening to my recording here, and we'll talk about a couple of the problems. So number 1, patient has candidiasis of the esophagus with opportunistic secondary to AIDS. So what that means is the candidiasis is because of the AIDS. It's an organism that took the opportunity, that is opportunistic, took the opportunity to affect this patient because they had a defective immune system due to the AIDS. So in that case, the patient's seen because of that organism in the esophagus, but the B20 is sequenced first, and then the candidiasis is sequenced second. Number 2, the pneumocystis carinii is a condition related to AIDS. That's something that you just would learn when you learn more about disease processes. So in that case, the B20 is sequenced first because the carinii is related, and then the carinii is sequenced second. Okay. If we look at number 4, I'm going to jump down to number 4. It says acute lymphadenitis due to HIV infection. It's related. Your diagnostic statement says due to. So the B20, the HIV infection, is sequenced first because that's our sequencing rule, and then the lymphadenitis is sequenced second. Now if we look at number 5, here the patient is coming in because of appendicitis, acute appendicitis. They don't have appendicitis because of AIDS. So this is not an AIDS-related condition. Your appendicitis is going to be sequenced first, and then you are going to sequence the fact that they have HIV. The B20 would be the second code, and the third code would be the Kaposi's sarcoma. And number 6, patients coming in because of Kaposi's sarcoma, which is a condition that's related to AIDS, and again, that's something that you would just learn through the process of learning more about disease processes. So the B20 AIDS is first, and then the Kaposi's sarcoma is second. Okay, and I would encourage you to finish through this exercise and check your work with the answer key. This concludes the recording on HIV and AIDS.